In 2009, while riding the wave of massive fame that followed her Hannah Montana success, Miley Cyrus embarked on a European tour that would unexpectedly become the setting for one of the most disturbing paranormal experiences ever reported by a major celebrity. At just 16 years old, she was already an international sensation, traveling city to city, performing for thousands, and managing the immense pressure that came with global stardom. To escape the chaos of hotels and provide a sense of normalcy for herself and her family, her team rented a private flat in London, modern, stylish, and conveniently located, yet also tucked away from the paparazzi and fan noise. It was the kind of place one might expect a young pop star to unwind in. But from the moment they arrived, something felt off, not in a dramatic, ghost jumps out kind of way, but a subtle, creeping unease that began with the atmosphere itself. The apartment was cold, not physically, but spiritually, emotionally. The air hung heavy with silence, a quiet that seemed too perfect, too still. The building itself had been a bakery many years before, built in the late 1800s and family-run for generations until its eventual conversion into residential apartments. The renovation had erased most physical traces of its past, but, as they would soon find out, the energy had remained. Strange things began happening almost immediately. Miley started experiencing vivid, unsettling dreams, twisting hallways, whispers behind closed doors, and the feeling of being watched. Initially, she chalked it up to jet lag, to stress, to the non-stop travel and fatigue. But the dreams didn't fade. Instead, they grew more intense, more real. It was as if the line between her sleeping world and the real one had begun to blur. Then came the first true incident, the moment things shifted from unsettling to terrifying. Miley was in another room when she heard her younger sister Noah scream, pure agonized fear. Miley sprinted to the bathroom, expecting a slip or injury. But what she found was far stranger. Noah was standing in the shower, the water running, steam billowing, her skin red and scalded. The hot water had turned on suddenly and forcefully, but what disturbed them most was the knob. It had physically twisted from cold to hot on its own. Noah hadn't touched it. There was no one else in the room. The piping was modern. It wasn't a plumbing glitch. It was something else. That same night, while trying to process what had happened, Miley began to recall something she had seen in the days prior, something she had dismissed as imagination. While showering, she had felt a presence, a gaze, cold and fixed. When she glanced up at the sink, she had seen a little boy sitting there, his feet kicking casually as he watched her. He didn't speak, he didn't move, he simply stared. Then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. She convinced herself it was exhaustion, but after the shower incident with Noah, she could no longer ignore it. Something was there, and it was interacting. She told her mom, Tish, but her mother brushed it off, trying to keep Noah calm and the family grounded during the stressful tour. But Miley couldn't let it go. The flat didn't feel like a place to rest anymore. It felt like a place that watched, that listened, that waited. And then, it wasn't just Miley who saw the signs. A few days later, her aunt came to stay at the flat. She had no idea about the strange experiences. One afternoon, she left the apartment to run errands and locked every window and door behind her. But when she returned, something was wrong. As she stepped inside, her heart dropped. Every window, every door in the flat was wide open. The kitchen windows, the bathroom, even the sliding glass doors leading to the tiny balcony. Everything she had secured had been opened, and yet there was no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen, no alarms triggered. Just open. She was shaken, and for the first time, Miley's mother could no longer deny that something was happening. They weren't imagining it. The apartment was active, energized, haunted. Determined to understand what they were facing, Miley began researching the history of the building. She learned that the apartment complex had once been a bakery in the 1800s, a small family-owned business passed down from father to son. The wife of the original baker had died from tuberculosis, and afterward, the husband and son continued running the shop. Years later, The father also passed away, leaving the son alone to run the business. But over time, he stopped opening the bakery, customers stopped coming, and one day he simply vanished. Some believed he'd moved away, others whispered he had died inside the building, unnoticed, forgotten. No record of his departure was ever found. Miley became convinced that the boy she had seen, the one sitting on the sink, was that son, a child left behind, bound to the space where he had lived, worked, and lost everyone he loved. The idea wasn't comforting, it was horrifying. From that point forward, the energy in the flat seemed to escalate. Lights would flicker when no one touched the switches. Cold spots would appear in rooms warmed by afternoon sunlight. The family dog began growling at corners, tail stiff, teeth bared, staring into spaces no one else could see. Noah became terrified to sleep alone. Miley left the hallway lights on at night, and in the early hours of one morning she saw him again. The boy, not in the bathroom, but in her bedroom doorway. He stood there silently, just watching, his face calm but expressionless, his eyes dark and endless. That was the breaking point. Miley packed her bags that night and refused to stay another minute. Years later, in an interview with LUK, she described the experience in detail, calling it one of the most terrifying moments of her life. She admitted that her mother was furious at the time for even talking about it, thinking it would scare Noah more. But the experiences were too intense, too real to ignore. "I swear," she said, "I'm not crazy. I saw him." And she wasn't the only one. The story gained traction, and fans began speculating about the flat, its location, its history. Paranormal investigators attempted to track down the original bakery's records, uncovering anecdotal accounts of a young boy who had once lived above a family-owned shop, reportedly seen alone through the windows just before the business closed for good. The flat itself still exists, though Miley has never returned. In fact, she has said publicly she never will. Those who've stayed in the same building have occasionally reported strange sensations, especially on the floor where she lived, but no one has documented an experience quite like hers. Some believe she, being so emotionally open and spiritually sensitive at the time, acted like a lightning rod for the energy in the building. Others believe the spirit had simply been dormant until she walked in. More layers unfolded as the years passed. A lesser-known account from a member of Miley's crew, a backup dancer named Renee, later surfaced in a niche podcast where she mentioned unexplained flickering lights and shadows moving across the flat during rehearsals. She had once seen a chair slide across the room during a quiet evening dinner. It was so subtle, so eerily normal in the moment that she almost dismissed it. But she remembered it every time the topic resurfaced. One of the makeup artists had reported losing tools, brushes and sponges that were later found in impossible places, like the locked glove compartment of the touring van or neatly stacked inside a cereal box. These weren't accidents. These were patterns. Paranormal researchers who studied the incident began exploring the theory of trauma imprints, residual energy that becomes imprinted in places where strong emotions, especially grief or abandonment, once lived. They proposed that the boy's spirit might not have been aware of Miley and her family as living beings, but was instead replaying a loop, a desperate attempt to be noticed, to exist, to be remembered. That theory, however, didn't explain the hot water incident or the doors and windows thrown open at once. Those were intelligent hauntings, acts with awareness. It suggested the presence had evolved or had been waiting for someone specific, someone it could reach. Some speculated it wasn't just one spirit, that while the boy was the face, the anchor, there was something older in the apartment, something that had latched onto the sorrow of the boy, nested into it, fed off it, a darker entity. Miley had reportedly confided in a close friend about waking up with bruises she couldn't explain, tiny fingertip marks on her arms and legs. She thought maybe she was hitting herself in her sleep, But after her dog growled at a blank wall for 20 minutes one night and refused to sleep in the bedroom again, she began to question that idea. A psychic was brought in by a curious producer working on a documentary-style series, though Miley didn't participate. According to that psychic's private notes, the spirit in the flat wasn't evil, but lonely, lost, and tethered by confusion. The child didn't understand he was gone. And he wasn't alone. The deeper history of the land revealed that before the bakery, the area had housed a makeshift hospital during one of London's many cholera outbreaks in the 1800s. Some deaths went undocumented, bodies buried nearby. Could that explain the deeper heaviness? Even now, the flat remains occupied by different tenants, but reviews are strangely mixed. Some say it's beautiful, quiet, perfect. Others mention frequent maintenance issues, pets reacting oddly, children crying at night and pointing at the sad boy. No official claims have ever been made, but those who know the story recognize the clues. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's something deeply unsettling about a young girl, already burdened by fame and isolation, encountering something ancient, something unseen, something left behind in the bones of a city as old as London. And perhaps what makes it most chilling is that it didn't begin with a bang. It began with silence, with a feeling, with dreams, then with burns, with visions, and finally, with a figure that didn't ask to be noticed, but simply was, always there, watching, waiting. And even now, all these years later, it raises the question: what happens when the most haunted place isn't a mansion in the woods or a forgotten asylum, but a modern apartment in one of the world's most bustling cities? And what happens when the person haunted isn't an ordinary witness, but someone whose every move is scrutinized, someone who's used to being seen, but never used to seeing what no one else can? Miley's haunted flat isn't just a ghost story. It's a reminder that beneath every layer of concrete and wallpaper and modern architecture lies a history, a memory, a story that doesn't always want to be forgotten. And sometimes, those stories whisper back,